Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Where the Conservatives have launched their election manifesto. By choosing Halifax, where Labour has a majority of less than 500, Theresa May is signalling her determination to show that the Conservative Party is now the champion of working people. Mainstream Britain, as she put it. So what are the main points? In a sweeping change to social care in England, if you're receiving care in your own home, the value of your house above £100,000 will be counted when calculating your contribution. And after 2020, the so-called triple lock on pensions, which guaranteed a minimum 2.5% rise each year, will go. Instead, it will simply keep pace with average earnings or inflation. Once again, there is a commitment to reduce annual net migration to the tens of thousands, together with curbs on some migrant workers. There's a promise to increase the overall schools budget in England by £4 billion by 2022. This was a manifesto which aims to show how different the Conservatives will be under Theresa May. Our political editor, Laura Koonsberg, has been looking through it.
Outside. Inside. Theresa May says she wants to end political tribes. Tell them.
They are getting rid of your nurses. I have been a nurse for 27 years. We are on our knees.
The Tory manifesto is meant to be a blueprint for what she now calls the mainstream. Yet with protesters at the gates, the Tories were whisked in behind tight lines to make their case. With Brexit the backdrop, Theresa May's ambitions plainly far wider than that.
I believe that our United Kingdom can emerge from this period of national change stronger, fairer and more prosperous than ever before. And I believe we can and must take this opportunity to build a great meritocracy here in Britain. Let us be in no doubt, it will not be easy. But with discipline and focus, effort and hard work, and above all, a unity of purpose stretching across this precious union of nations, from north to south and east to west, I believe we can and must go forward together.
But all that depends on getting the mind-bendingly complicated Brexit right. If you were looking for detail of how, it wasn't here today.
But all of this depends on getting the next 5 years right. If we fail, the consequences for Britain and for the economic security of ordinary working people will be dire. If we succeed, the opportunities ahead of us are great.
Those are, she says, a long-term solution to caring for the elderly, more or less matching Labour's promise of cash for the NHS and new grammar schools, but the same broken target for immigration, fewer free hot meals at primary school. And for the Tories, who've been in charge already for 7 years, pushing back the promise to clear the deficit until 2025. But her finale, a contentious claim to stand for all.
For too many people in Britain today, life is simply much harder than many seem to think or realise. They're not ideological, they don't buy into grand visions, they aren't fooled by politicians who promise the earth and claim no tough choices are required. They make those choices every day in their own lives and understand that politicians who aspire to lead must do the same. With the right Brexit deal secured, my mainstream government will deliver for mainstream Britain. So I offer myself as your Prime Minister. Come with me as I lead Britain. Strengthen my hand as I fight for Britain, and stand with me as I deliver for Britain. And with confidence in ourselves and a unity of purpose in our country, let us all go forward together.
Ovation inside.
You've not got to block, you can't block this.
But anger outside.
Tories in a mill in Yorkshire, you couldn't make it up.
Austerity is 7 years old.
What do you think of the Tories coming to Yorkshire today?
I think it's a disgrace, Laura.
Why?
They're not welcome, they're not welcome. They're not welcome because for the past 6 years they've been running our industries down.
One of the Tories' biggest claims is that Jeremy Corbyn wants to take us to the 1970s. I think she wants to take us to the 1870s. Absolutely ridiculous.
You are ditching much of the manifesto that you and your party stood on just 2 years ago. More families, including traditional Tory voters, will have to pay more for elderly care. Many families will lose hot meals for their children at school. You're pushing back balancing the books again, and your immigration proposals might cost billions to the economy. Now, when you put that all together, wouldn't some voters be quite entitled to conclude that adds up to quite a bleak picture?
No, not at all. What I'm putting forward is a vision for opportunity and prosperity across the whole of the country for the future. I've been clear there are some hard choices that need to be taken. It's making sure we're honest with the public.
This is a bit of a bleak picture.
It's wrapped up as a new kind of sensible conservatism. But is everyone signed up?
Okay, well, the entire cabinet has just filed past right at the end of the Prime Minister's speech. Unfortunately, none of us wants to talk to us about whether or not this truly is a new kind of conservatism and whether or not they are all happy about what she's just outlined.
Her pitch is safety first, but there are dangers in her plans. As the Prime Minister left through jeers and protests, her dream of an end to left and right will seem a long way off. Laura Koonsberg, BBC News, Halifax.
One of the main aims of the Conservative Manifesto is to try to tackle the rising cost of social care in England. It says anyone with assets worth more than £100,000, including the family home, should pay for their own social care, whether it be residential or at home. That payment would be deferred and then taken from the estate after they die. Our social affairs correspondent Alison Holt takes a look at the plans for social care.
Yeah, they're on fire, so it's called burning daylight.
At the heart of the crisis in social care that Theresa May says she wants to fix are real lives. People like Andriani and her son Alex. She has dementia.
What was that, hello? What type of flower has thorns?
I don't know.
Roses.
Oh, roses.
It's a rose bush.
This was 2014. Andriani had sold her small house in London to pay for residential care, which was costing more than £60,000 a year.
She was able to walk, she was able to hold a conversation, she was able to enjoy a walk around the gardens. Right, let's go and get a cup of tea. Since then she's deteriorated quite a lot. And we can have a look at the garden. She's now essentially forgotten how to walk, and she can't really speak very much anymore.
Now her care costs nearly £100,000 a year.
Do you remember when we were living at Highfield? Every morning I'd make you a cup of tea. Do you remember?
Most is paid by the NHS, but the family still has to find nearly £40,000 a year. Under the Tory plans, Andriani would benefit from being allowed to keep more of her money, but would get no help with the huge costs she faces before that.
I'd like to say that the system is broken at the moment, because if the system was broken, then potentially it could be fixed. But having seen it from the inside, I don't think we have a system at all.
At the moment in England, people only get council-funded help with social care if they have assets and savings of less than £23,250. The Conservatives plan to raise that threshold so people have £100,000 protected. But for the first time, people who need home care will, like those in residential care, have the value of their home included in these calculations. So, if you have a house worth £100,000 and no other assets, you would get help with care. But if your assets, including your home, are worth £300,000, then you'd have to spend £200,000 on care before getting council support. It wouldn't mean moving out of your home, as deferred payments would allow the costs to be paid from a person's estate after they die.
We're saying that everyone will have the confidence of knowing that they can pass on £100,000 to their children and grandchildren, But there are trade-offs in order to make that commitment, and we will be treating people who have care at home in the same way as people are cared for in care homes.
But existing government plans to limit the high costs some people with the greatest needs face would be scrapped. Sir Andrew Dilnot wrote the report that recommended a care cap. He says the new plans don't go far enough.
The certainty here is that if you have assets in total, including the value of your house, of more than £100,000, then basically you're on your own. You've got to pay for yourself until you get down to that level. So for most people, the prospect is one that if they need social care, they're going to have to pay.
And for many, the test of the proposals for social care will be whether they help people plan for the future, whatever it holds. Alison Holt, BBC News.
There's a pledge to spend an extra £4 billion on schools in England. Partly that will be paid for by scrapping universal free school lunches in the first 3 years of primary school. The Conservatives will commit to replacing the lunches with free school breakfasts for every pupil in every year of primary school. Our education editor, Branwen Jeffries, reports on the school lunch proposal.
There we go, sweetie.
Waiting for a free hot lunch, but families could face charges for school dinners, with parents of most infants asked to pay.
You want a banana?
It was his idea to give the youngest free meals. The Lib Dem policy meant lots of money on new kitchens. Now the Conservatives say most parents should pay, with only the poorest families getting free school meals. It's estimated £650 million a year would be saved by ending free lunches for infants. That could go towards adding £4 billion cash in total for England schools. But that could still mean a 2 to 3% real terms cut per pupil by 2022. Free lunches have been popular, with most parents and children happily gobbling them up. Making more parents pay for school dinners is a decision driven by political necessity. There's been growing unease about the pressure on school budgets. Many parents have been campaigning, galvanised by plans for a new funding formula to share out money differently. To sweeten the message, a different offer from the Tories. Instead of free lunches for the youngest, a promise of free breakfast for all children in primary school, leaving the head here worrying about how to arrange that.
In principle, great, but that's a significant adjustment to the way that we work, and it will need funding. And I will potentially have to either be employing new people or changing everybody's contracts in order to ensure that there's enough staff here to manage children from 8 o'clock.
At pick-up time in Solihull, what did parents make of the offer?
I think school lunches are more important for children.
Well, I don't think it's a very good idea because I've got 4 little kids and it costs me a fortune to feed all 4 of them at school.
I feel lunch is far better than a breakfast.
Breakfast is something they should really be having at home before the school day starts.
No one likes giving up a free lunch. Parents may feel better if it does end up in school budgets, which even after this will still be under pressure. Branwen Jeffries, BBC News.
The Conservatives set out a number of key economic pledges today on pensions, on tax and the deficit. Our economics editor, Kamal Ahmed, has been taking a closer look at the possible costs of implementing the Conservative manifesto.
The target of balancing the books and eliminating the deficit has been pushed into the future. The triple tax lock has been abandoned. The promise on how much pensions will rise by changed. Theresa May laid out a new Tory prospectus for the country, making it clear that the old approach of David Cameron was history. Let's start with the Tories' attitude to borrowing or eliminating the deficit. That's balancing the amount the government raises in taxes with what it spends. Last autumn, the Chancellor said he wanted to achieve this long-held Tory goal as early as possible in the next Parliament. Many economists took that to mean by 2022. Today, the manifesto changes that target to 2025. Theresa May has given herself room to borrow more if the economy needs it. On tax, there has also been a change. In 2015, David Cameron promised no increases in income tax, national insurance or VAT. Only one of those remains, no increase in VAT. The rest have been replaced with a rather vaguer, firm intention to reduce taxes. Many now predict national insurance contributions at least will rise. And then pensions. In 2015, the Conservatives promised a triple lock, that pensions would increase by either the rate of inflation, the rate of earnings growth, or 2.5%, whichever was highest. That is now a double lock. Inflation or earnings will be used, which could mean lower pension increases if both fall below 2.5%. The Conservative leader has given herself more wriggle room on the economy. She can borrow more, tax more, and has opened the door to lower increases in pensions. One striking feature of the manifesto: very few costings. Mrs May doesn't want her hands tied. Kamal Ahmed, BBC News.
And our political editor Laura Koonsberg joins me now. Laura, are we seeing the emergence of something called, say, Mayism, if I can call it that?
Well, I think, George, Theresa May doesn't style herself as some kind of great philosopher, and she also doesn't think that's what people want. I think what we've seen today, in its most simple terms, is what she would like to do, the solutions she believes that only she has for the country's problems. And I think what we've seen is a bit of a political pick and mix. She's been felt liberated enough to junk some of David Cameron's old ideas, liberated enough to resuscitate some old Tory ideas that she believes in, like grammar schools, liberated enough to do things like cutting benefits for some pensioners and cutting back on some free school meals. But at the same time, you know, she feels liberated enough as a Conservative to meddle more in business. So look, some people might think that's a contradiction, but for others, and in her view, that is what she believes will work. Two big things, though, haven't changed to the backdrop of all this, whether or not this is the birth of a new philosophy. Firstly, a lot of people are feeling the pinch. The cuts will continue. This is still a time of public spending squeezes, even though the government has pushed back that deficit target to 2025. And second of all, of course, overshadowing all of this, the potential complications and uncertainties of Brexit. The manifesto is a solemn contract, an offer to the public. If re-elected, Theresa May set herself very big goals.
Laura, thank you. Welcome back to Halifax. Now, one of the key themes of the Conservative manifesto is fairness across the generations. So the guarantee of a minimum rise in pensions has gone, and the elderly being cared for in their own homes will now see the value of their home count towards the cost of their care, all but £100,000. I've been getting reaction from two generations of voters. A cafe in central Halifax, and it's coffee morning for this group of pensioners. The youngest is 71, the eldest 90. Firstly, are you all going to vote on June the 8th?
Yes. Yes. Oh, yes.
Definitely. And Maureen, is it time for pensioners to give up some of their money so that other people can benefit?
My house, I thought, when it was sold, would go, the money would go to my children, you know.
No, it won't be all. I mean, £100,000 will go to your children.
Yeah,
it's only the
yeah.
amount above that.
Above that, yeah.
How do you feel about that?
Well, I suppose we can't really do anything about it, can we, if they decide to do it? I don't really agree with it, but...
I don't want to sound rude, but some people might say, well, that's a bit selfish.
Well, I don't think so. I've worked all my life. I don't see why I should give to pay for the younger ones.
A lot of them don't want to work.
But that's not really,
No,
that's not fair, is it, Peggy?
Yes,
Lots
it
of people...
is, because they are living the life of Riley. They should live according to the means like we had.
For the last few years, you've known that your state pension is going to go up by 2.5%. Well, out there, people haven't had that guarantee.
But I mean, 2.5%, they're not giving us the earth after all, are they? I say it barely buys a loaf of bread or a jar of coffee these days.
They all own homes worth more than £100,000, but only just. They don't think of themselves as well off. If more money is needed, Ray thinks it should come from the overseas aid budget.
I do think this money, which is being spent abroad unnecessarily, should be used first for the people in this country.
Have you always thought of yourselves as Conservative voters?
Oh, no. We were all brought up as Labour.
Yeah.
You still think Theresa May is your
Still think she's the best.
She's the best one.
So, as you just heard, there is, I think, how shall I put it, grudging acceptance of the changes that Theresa May is proposing. But what about the younger generation? What do they think?
I work full-time, pay bills, everything else. I do think that the younger generation need that little bit more help.
You need money to be able to get educated, to be able to get a job, to get the good money, and it's not there.
Nicola, Zoe and Sophie grew up together. Sophie is on maternity leave, but even when she and her partner both worked, life was tough.
With bills to pay and already struggling to make ends meet on the wages that we have.
And now she could face a bill for school lunches.
Having to pay for school meals, it'll just be another stress, another bill to pay out, £40 a month. It's a lot of money.
So there you have it, the view across the generations.
Theresa May said she is targeting mainstream Britain and taking tough choices to make the country strong. That includes tackling the crisis in social care. But her manifesto is also about signalling a break with the Cameron era. Here's our political editor Robert Peston on Mrs May's blueprint for power.
Not a last tango in Halifax, more of a first one, as the Prime Minister arrived in the Yorkshire town to launch her very first general election programme as Tory leader.
Today, as we face this critical election for our country, I launch my manifesto for Britain's future. A manifesto to see us through Brexit and beyond.
She had a name for the fairer Britain she thinks we can become after we leave the European Union.
I believe we can and must take this opportunity to build a great meritocracy here in Britain. It means making Britain a country that works not for the privileged few, but for everyone.
And then came words we haven't heard often from Tory leaders.
It is why the government I lead will be relentless in tackling burning injustices like discrimination on the basis of race, gender, mental health or disability. For injustice is a scar on the soul of our nation, and I will fight it wherever it is found.
How different from a former Tory Prime Minister with whom she's often compared.
Margaret Thatcher was a Conservative, I'm a Conservative, this is a Conservative manifesto.
Theresa May insisted there's no such thing as Mayism, but her programme for government does have big themes. It includes asking many more older people to pay for their own social care when they become infirm, although the state would step in to help us if our property and assets fell to £100,000 or less. Also, the state pension will no longer rise by a minimum of 2.5%, as the so-called triple lock will be replaced by a double lock. She's scrapping David Cameron's triple tax lock as well, so there's no promise not to increase income tax rates or national insurance. But she does repeat his pledge to reduce immigration to the tens of thousands per year. There'll also be new controls, a price cap on what we pay for energy, and Theresa May wants workers to have their views represented on the boards of companies. The fight against social division and inequality starts here, she said.
Remarkable day for you. First ever personal manifesto launch.
But surely that's at odds with what her government has actually been doing.
As a result of your tax and benefit policies, poorer people will get poorer over the next few years.
I want to see a country where prosperity is spread across the country, where we are encouraging the growth of businesses for the future to provide those jobs. We can only do that, though, if we get the Brexit negotiations right.
The manifesto does repeat your party's commitment to get immigration down to the tens of thousands. Does that mean that it's your ambition to do that by 2023?
We haven't set an arbitrary date for doing this, because in immigration you have to be constantly working at it. There's no single thing that suddenly changes the figures in the way that you want.
What is your vision for post-Brexit Britain?
Well, my vision for Britain post-Brexit is a truly global Britain. And I also want to ensure that people here in this country are able to get on regardless of where they come from or which school they went to.
Sounds quite New Labour.
It's a good Conservative principle that actually we encourage people to aspire, that we ensure that there are opportunities there, and then it's for people to determine how hard they're willing to work.
The Blue Party, perhaps a bit redder, a bit more lefty than it's been, at least in the rhetoric. Though as she found out as she left Halifax, we're a long way from being one nation. Work in progress, perhaps. Robert Peston, ITV News.
Well, as Robert reported there, one of the most controversial announcements is on social care. Mrs May said its proper funding had been ducked by governments for far too long. She says her plans for England will ensure everyone has dignity in old age in a way that's fair to all. Our political correspondent Paul Brand reports.
Saeed Musfi needs constant care for his Alzheimer's.
Comfortable here?
He doesn't have the money to pay for it, unless you count the home he's living in. And under Conservative plans, the longer he lives, the less value will be left in this house. His children may have to sell it to pay the fees.
It's absolutely unfair, because what I see looking at their lives, that they were very, very hardworking people. They worked all their lives. They were going to work, paying their taxes, absolutely genuine, having a very strong work ethic. But it looks like that everything is going to be taken away.
At the moment, care is only free for families like the Musfis if they have less than £23,250. The Conservatives would increase that to £100,000. But for the first time, they'd also count the value of your property if you're cared for at home. It's currently only included if you're in residential care, though nobody would have to sell their home to pay the fees until after they died. But with the average property worth £233,000, most would have to pay. It could cost the Musfis £500,000.
It's trying to suck out every last penny from where they can, and it's just going to make it unfortunate for the family that survived to receive what Mum and Dad have worked so hard in their life to build up.
6 years ago, this economist advised the coalition government to cap care costs at £35,000. He says the Conservative plans punish those who fall ill.
We need a system that allows all of us to regain some control over this potentially very big risk, and there's nothing there that does that. The proposals for social insurance schemes for a care cap, which would have limited people's exposure, have been lost. That means that people will continue to be faced with something that creates fear and anxiety.
The Conservatives haven't announced their promises yet for Scotland and Wales, but under their plans in England, misfortune could cost those like Saeed Musfi not just their health, but their home. Paul Brandt, ITV News.
Well, Mrs May's tough choices didn't stop with social care. Other measures in the manifesto include ending free school lunches for infants in England, replacing them with free breakfasts. That would help fund an extra £4 billion for schools by 2022. Winter fuel payments will be means tested, taking away £300 from wealthier pensioners. There was a pledge to balance the budget by 2025. The NHS will get an extra £8 billion over the next 5 years. And as she told ITV News on Monday, there'll be a free vote on bringing back fox hunting. So, a lot there for voters to think about. Our correspondent Penny Marshall went to the West Midlands to hear what matters to people there.
Birmingham woke up to new Conservative promises with the potential to change lives. But will these plans to reshape Britain help to turn traditional Labour strongholds blue? Pensioners are used to Tory generosity, but this manifesto takes some things away.
I think the triple lock was a good thing, and I think it's going to exasperate the gap between rich and poor.
It is true to say that the winter fuel payment, for instance, should be means tested. I see no point in giving the winter fuel payment to people who don't need it.
And at this retirement village, grandparents' interest wasn't just limited to their own issues.
I'm very angry about removing the school meals from the children. Maggie Thatcher was the milk snatcher. Now Theresa May is taking food literally from children's mouths.
All I hear is arguments which divide us. You're asking me about pensioners. You spoke about the children. We're all in the same society.
This factory employs 37% non-British workers. Tax cuts here were welcome, but plans to curb immigration concern this food producer's founder and managing director.
It's all about employment of the right people in the right position, irrespective of whether they are British or non-British.
Here, 17 different faiths and nationalities work alongside each other.
To be honest, I'm an immigrant myself. I've got 2 children that were born here, so I'm not feeling quite happy about that.
There's been a sort of movement with the Brexit vote, with things like that, where party politics to me don't really seem to be counting as much as they used to. It's more about the nationalism versus the globalism.
Birmingham, like everywhere, must now absorb what's on offer from the three main parties. The party political choices at this election are as different as they are bold. Penny Marshall, ITV News, Birmingham.
The Labour leader, Jeremy Corbyn, accused Mrs May of betraying millions of pensioners with her manifesto and of failing to lift living standards. Her pledges will be debated by other parties at tonight's ITV Leaders' debate. But Mrs May will not be there herself, as our political correspondent Libby Vina reports.
As ITV prepared to host the first big debate of this election, the opposition party leaders were digesting the Tory manifesto, and it wasn't going down well. A lurch to the left, not a bit of it, said the Labour leader.
Well, she's attacking all the older people in our society. She's damaging social care in our society. This is a manifesto which will make the situation across Britain worse.
We're seeing young people losing their lunches, and we're seeing old people losing their homes. This is a heartless Conservative manifesto put together by somebody, Theresa May, who would only do this because she assumes she's going to win anyway. It's the clearest sign yet that the Conservatives are taking you for granted.
But what about the voters? Recent TV debates have given them a chance to challenge party leaders directly. 2 years ago, 7 were in the lineup, including the then Prime Minister, David Cameron.
Now tonight you're going to hear a lot of people claiming a lot of things. But please remember, these are the same people who claimed that if we followed our plan, unemployment would go up.
But it seems some of today's politicians are more reluctant to put themselves in the spotlight. So the set is ready, final preparations underway for tonight's big election debate on ITV. All the main leaders have been invited, but the Prime Minister, Theresa May, has indicated that she'll stay away. Now it seems Jeremy Corbyn, who'd repeatedly challenged her to appear, has decided if she won't come, neither will he.
A TV debate must include the Prime Minister, the leader of the Conservative Party. That would be a proper debate. I've made the offer many times since the day the election was called.
But others were more than happy to take part. Are you hoping to make your mark again, First Minister?
Yeah, I'm looking forward to the debate.
A debate where 5 party leaders will be going head-to-head over Britain's future. Libby Vina, ITV News, Salford.
Right, let's return now to our main story in the Tory Manifesto today. Our political editor Robert Peston joins me now for a final thought. And we've had 3 of the manifestos. What do they tell you about this election?
Well, first of all, the big differences between the 3 main parties are over Brexit, the Lib Dems, the one party potentially able to keep us in the EU if that's what we wanted in a few years' time. Theresa May saying she's for a short, sharp, clean, hard Brexit. Labour somewhere in the middle. Many people have no idea precisely where in the middle. But the thing which strikes me more than anything else is that this is an election where none of them are actually offering new tax cuts. In different ways, they're all trying to take money from us. Why is that? Because there's a perception that our public services are creaking. They need more money. And the question, therefore, facing all of us is which party, which leader do we trust to fix those public services?
Very quick thought from you on the debate tonight. Neither Corbyn nor May there, of course.
Well, I think many of us would say that's pathetic, but we're still going to have a really gripping debate about the priorities needed for this country.
All right, Robert Peston, thank you very much indeed.
So the promise is that a Conservative government will tackle the 5 giant challenges facing Britain over the coming decade. Building a strong economy, tackling social division, meeting the pressures of an ageing society, dealing with the upheavals caused by fast-changing technology, and, of course, Brexit. And in setting out her stall, Theresa May declared there's no such thing as Mayism, only good, solid conservatism. Here's our political editor, Gary Gibbon.
Straining over a wall to shout her down, demonstrators in Halifax telling Theresa May she's not welcome here.
Tories out!
Her pollsters tell her she is, and could win back a seat that last went Tory 34 years ago. Just 2 years ago, she backed the last Tory manifesto. Today, Theresa May published her own, rather different one. ditching David Cameron's commitment to a triple lock on pension increases, the ban on tax rises and the promised $12 billion in welfare cuts. Theresa May suggested some, maybe even some Tories, didn't know the country they ran.
For too many people in Britain today, life is simply much harder than many seem to think or realise. They're not ideological. They don't buy into grand visions. They aren't fooled by politicians who promise the earth and claim no tough choices are required. They make those choices every day in their own lives and understand that politicians who aspire to lead must do the same.
She is keeping her predecessor's commitment to getting immigration down to the tens of thousands, though there's still no real clue how. In stark contrast to many predecessors, Theresa May has challenged older voters, means testing the winter fuel allowance and making those with homes worth more than £100,000 pay towards their home social care.
We'll see that those elderly people who've been worried about how they pay for care in their home won't have to worry about that in future. They won't have to pay while they're still alive. Nothing will be paid. They won't have to sell their home while they're living in it.
As the small demonstration shouted itself hoarse outside, Theresa May laid claim to huge tracts of the centre ground and called on Labour voters to cross to her team.
Government, put squarely at the service of ordinary working people, can and should be a force for good. A force that steps up and acts in the interests of ordinary working people, that does not ignore them or walk on by on the other side, but serves the interests of the mainstream of the British public. With the right Brexit deal secured, my mainstream government will deliver for mainstream Britain. It is time to put the old tribal politics behind us and to come together in the national interest.
The manifesto attacked rigid dogma and worship of the free markets as dangerous. Was it a whole new political outlook?
There is no Mayism. I know you journalists like to write about it. There is good, solid conservatism, which puts the interests of the country and the interests of ordinary working people at the heart of everything we do in government. Thank you. Thank you.
With that, she was off, and the Cabinet, under strict instructions to leave smartly without speaking to the press. Do we go now? Marched out too. Their private thoughts on her political shifts, only to be guessed at. The language used about big business in this manifesto is a long way from what Margaret Thatcher and many of her successors would have used. It says people are rightly affronted by the big paychecks handed out to bosses. It says that customers who trust big established energy companies end up being punished by them. And it says that property developers are careless, building substandard homes that don't enhance people's lives. What did voters here think of a 100,000 threshold for care and pensioner benefits being trimmed back? Are you drawn towards Theresa May at the moment at all?
Yes, I am. I think she's a very strong woman. And as a woman, I go for that.
And the fact that you're not going to get your winter fuel allowance?
Bears very little relevance, quite frankly.
You voted for different parties in the past?
Yes.
And the fact that Theresa May might trim some of your benefits?
That said, she had it. I'm not voting for her.
She's lost you?
Definitely.
If she pushes these policies, she's not getting your support?
No. Gets you to the...
You think it should be higher, the threshold?
Oh, yes.
Will it affect the way you vote?
It won't affect the way I vote.
Has she got your vote?
I hate to say it, my poor old dad will be spinning in his grave, but yes.
Dropping the ban on tax increases, loosening the deficit reduction rule and putting up spending on health and education, all that will leave some senior Tories very queasy. They're echoes of when David Cameron got ahead of the Tory pack with his socially liberal agenda on issues like gay marriage. Theresa May will be hoping that with her focus on leadership and Brexit, she can take the Tory party to a new place. Gary Gibbon, Channel 4 News, Halifax.
Well, the Conservative manifesto's planned changes to social care funding scrap plans for a cap on costs. but says people can keep hold of more of their money. Theresa May said it was the first time a government had produced a proper long-term plan for the sustainability of social care in England, but critics have warned that it left the elderly facing an uncertain future with no control over their care costs. Here's our health and social care correspondent, Victoria MacDonald.
A family snap. Len Winch is 92 and has dementia. His wife Mari next to him is 90 and frail, and that's their daughter Joan Watson. Her parents are in a Bournemouth care home. Together it's £2,000 a week. Not unusual.
With their savings and the sale of their bungalow, you know, if things go well and we get a good price for the bungalow and you know, there aren't too many expenses, then they've probably got enough for 4 years, 4.5 years. And then they probably have to move out of that home.
And that's because local authorities tend to pay less for care than many residential homes charge. Just thinking about it reduced Mrs. Watson to tears.
I wouldn't like them to go into I've seen some awful homes. I couldn't have put them into and to be honest, I wouldn't want to go in those homes myself.
Christchurch, where she and her husband live, is a seaside town filled with people who could face these same decisions, to be looked after in their own homes or to go into residential care. Nobody really disputes that the social care system is in crisis. Years of underfunding and local authority cutbacks. And you only really need to come to a place like Christchurch where a third of the population are over 65, and you realise that this is a situation that is only going to get worse. Today, the Conservatives promised people could keep more of their assets under a new care funding system. At the moment, anyone with money and property over the value of £23,250 has to pay the full cost of their residential care. For care at home, though, only income and savings are taken into account. Now, everyone will be able to keep their last £100,000. But if they are at home, for the first time, the value of their property will be included, which could affect thousands not currently having to pay. And for families like the Watsons, this does not address why the cost of dementia care is so high.
What I think we haven't succeeded in seeing yet from any of the politicians in this election is a recognition that people with dementia and their families incur enormous cost, which for other diseases doesn't fall on the individual.
Mrs. May had pledged a long-term sustainable solution to the care system. One Tory insider today, however, described this as a direction of travel that will need a degree of consultation. So Andrew Dilnott, whose review of social care proposed a cap on costs, now abandoned by the Tories, was more scathing.
The reason a cap would be better is that at the moment, social care is like being in a shop with no prices for people. So although you might know how much it will cost for your care or the care of somebody senior to you in your family each week or month, you've no idea how many weeks or months it will go on for, so you don't know how much it will cost overall.
Labour and the Liberal Democrats have pledged extra funding for social care and proposed a cap on costs. The fundamental issue for Mrs. Watson, though, is this. She doesn't want a legacy. She wants her parents to be well cared for in the last years of their lives.
It's not fair because they have saved all their life. But, I don't know what the answer is. I think they thought they were saving it to leave to me, really. But, I've always said to them, spend your money,
Victoria MacDonald reporting. Well, now to the business case set out in the Tory Manifesto. It aims for a balanced budget by 2025. That's 10 years behind the original deadline set by George Osborne and David Cameron. It pledges government interference in corporate takeovers. We do believe in responsible business, said Mrs. May. But is there a coherent economic plan behind all this? Our economics correspondent, Helia Ebrahimi, is with me now. Helia.
Well, as you were saying, this manifesto marks a real shift from traditional Anglo-Saxon economic thinking. but it also showcases the ongoing battle between Number 10 and the Treasury. Now, clearly, the war has been lost when it comes to leaving Europe, access to the single market and immigration. But some smaller skirmishes have been won by Treasury. As we've heard, the triple lock on pensions and the lock on tax has gone. But today we also got the first real hint of a serious watering down on one of Mrs May's key policies on energy. Just a few weeks ago, she wrote in The Sun about her policy, quite interventionist on energy caps. And she was very explicit. She talked about saving £100 a year for 17 million customers around the UK. Well, in today's manifesto, no mention of that £100 figure. Gone too is the 17 million target. Instead, it simply says more customers will be helped. Now, when we talked to one supplier, they said they're not cracking the champagne open quite yet, but the stock market tells you a different story, because if you look at Centrica, the owner of British Gas, their shares were up 4%, adding almost £500 million to their value.
And on immigration, they're still insisting they can get it down from hundreds of thousands to tens of thousands.
Well, that's the war that really has been won by Number 10, because coming down to those levels is a policy Treasury's not comfortable with and businesses hate, and let me tell you why. Look at housing. This is a manifesto that is even more ambitious than David Cameron's plans. He had wanted 200,000 new homes to be built. But actually, we're not even delivering that. We only got to 168,000. The manifesto wants us to build 250,000 new homes every year. But one trade body was saying, well, look, 17% of our builders aren't from the UK. So who exactly is going to build these homes? And there is the inherent conflict between a lot of the policies in this manifesto and the backbone of Mrs May's Brexit agenda.
Thanks, Helen.
Thanks, Chris. Now, earlier I spoke to the Defence Secretary, Michael Fallon. I started by asking whether, with changes to paying for social care and no guarantees over no tax rises, it'll be the very working families they're trying to win over who'll be hardest hit by this manifesto.
No, because we've increased the threshold. At the moment, it's only £23,000, which is derisory. We've increased the threshold by which your home would be taken into account all the way up to £100,000. So that would only affect a smaller number of people. National insurance is going to go up. We've withdrawn that proposal. Came out at the time of the budget. There's a wider review.
Well, you haven't ruled out an increase, have you?
Well, we've withdrawn the proposal that was made at the time, and as you know, we have been reducing
are you now, just to be clear on this, are you now ruling out an increase in national insurance? Because that's not clear for you on a manifesto.
Well, let me make it very clear to you. We have withdrawn the proposal that was on the table at the time of the budget.
But you're not ruling it out.
Well, we're the party of reducing taxation. We've
taken
millions of people.
Not in this manifesto, you're not.
Well, on the contrary, we've said in this manifesto we are committed to increasing the personal tax allowance. You're wrong on that.
But you're not ruling out tax increases across the board.
Just a minute. We've said we're going to raise the personal tax allowance to £12,500 by 2020. We're committed to reducing the corporation tax that businesses pay, particularly small businesses. That's vital because they create the jobs, and look at the record employment figures we had announced yesterday, and we have taken millions of people out of tax altogether. We are the party of lower taxation and the party that helps working families keep more of what they earn.
You can say that you're the party of lower taxation as often as you like, but if you're not ruling out certain tax increases, who's going to believe you?
Well, you believe us if you look at our record. This is what we've been doing for the last 7 years now, taking people the lowest paid out of tax altogether, increasing the tax allowance for 30 million people beyond that, reducing taxes and rates, business taxes for small businesses. We are the party of lower taxation, and I can assure you we're going to keep to that.
You are taking more money out of people's pockets. So add to strong and stable, your favourite adjectives in this campaign, you should be adding painful, shouldn't you? Strong, stable and painful.
No, we are taking the decision to put more resources into social care. And I think most people understand the pressure there's been on the NHS and understand as more of us are living longer that care has to be paid for. We're asking people to contribute towards that in the same way when the care is in their own home as when a relative is put into residential care, but we're asking the richest, the very wealthy, to lose their entitlement to the winter fuel allowance, for example. We're having that means tested so that that money too can be set aside for social care.
Let's talk about immigration. You say again that you want to bring immigration down to the tens of thousands. Non-EU immigration was 168,000 last year. How are you going to bring that down?
Well, it was coming down. It went up briefly last year. It'll be coming down again. But the easiest way to bring all immigration down...
That's a huge number you have to reduce it by.
Well, hang on. The easiest way to bring immigration down, of course, is to leave the European Union, because under freedom of movement, anybody can up sticks from Bulgaria or Lithuania and come to Britain. Once we leave the European Union, there will be no more freedom of movement, and it'll be much easier to manage immigration from that source, but also non-EU immigration that you mentioned. We continue to tackle through ending the abuse of some family visas.
How will you bring that down to tens of thousands? Who will you choose? Who will you exclude?
You have to tackle it across the board. The abuse of student visas, family visas, looking at the number of people who come in to work here. There's no single magic bullet for bringing immigration down. Leaving the European Union will help, but we'll continue to bring it down elsewhere.
So there was a big question at the end of the last elections. Where had that famous Ed Stone gone? You know, the commandments written down by Ed Miliband. And we now know where it's gone. It's been resurrected in a small, shiny blue pamphlet, otherwise known as the Tory party manifesto for the 2017 election, because so many of the principles outlined on the Ed Stone have cropped up in your manifesto. So you should be thanking Ed Miliband, shouldn't you?
No, because Labour couldn't have delivered the ideas that they had in their manifesto.
But you agree with the ideas,
without excessive borrowing. No, we don't agree with their specific proposals. We do agree now that social care needs to be funded properly. They dodged it for years in government. They were in government for 13 years. They did nothing about social care. That's why we've inherited the problem. It's a tough decision. We're facing up to it today. We're putting more money into school budgets as well. And we are preparing other policies to build a stronger, fairer Britain after we leave the European Union. You wouldn't have got any of that with a Labour government.
Thanks.
Thank you, Matt.